I like to really explain everything through the lens of evolution, and even like science to me really helps make sense for people, for me at least.
Yeah.
So I always begin by understanding how the mind works and why it works the way it works, so that off the bat, you can stop making it an enemy and
Mm.
personalizing it, and stop identifying with it, right? When you understand this is just a function that nature has put in place, it's not me doing it.
Mm.
That's really the first stage of shadow work, is to remove your identity from that shadow,
Mm.
because the identity is what keeps it alive and sustains it. It's like the propane tank under the barbecue. It's keeping it alive.
Yeah.
So your subconscious mind is the system nature has put in place to help you navigate through reality. But the mind can't actually know reality. It can only know what you perceive of reality or what you believe about it. So when we go through traumatic events, truly of any kind, even the most subtle little sense of anxiety you get in a certain moment, all the way up to a full-blown panic attack type of experience, these are all traumas that leave energetic imprints in the subconscious. And the reason they leave imprints is because the mind, again, can't know reality. It only knows what you have to say about reality. So anytime you engage with reality in an emotionally charged way, the mind just goes, all right, well, we need to remember that one because that's obviously important data. So it will map reality based on how you've reacted in the past. Does that make sense?
100%.
So when you experience a traumatic event, the mind will sort of save that in the software and go, okay, so let's remember that experience and try not to replicate it, because that was painful. That was potentially threatening to my survival. So let's avoid that. So an easy example would be like social anxiety. If you were perhaps bullied in junior high or something, then you will find as an adult, you have a lot of social anxiety when you're around, like at parties or gatherings. People you don't know make you very nervous and go walled up inside and shrink, because your mind is saying, hey, remember all those years ago when we tried to express ourselves in social environments and we got bullied or beat up or whatever? Let's not repeat that mistake. Better safe than sorry, right? So the mind is always playing better safe than sorry, because from a purely survival standpoint, that's actually a very intelligent way to survive. If you always assume the worst, if you always take the most pessimistic point of view, you're most likely to avoid danger. Positive points of view don't really serve you in a survival sense, because if you're being positive and you're wrong, you might get eaten by a lion or something. So the mind's always trying to avoid, avoid, avoid. So we call these defense mechanisms. So the act of shadow work is basically to go into the subconscious and prove to your subconscious that this is safe now. We don't need this defense anymore. I don't need you to put the alarm system up every time this experience happens, like a party or whatever. I am safe, I'm loved, I am protected. And the only way we can send the mind that signal that it's safe to lay down your arms, as the Course would say, is love. So we go back to that memory, and the mind doesn't know time at all. There's no sense of time in the subconscious. It's all happening now. So you can truly relive experiences and go back to that moment of being bullied. And instead of fear and sadness and whatever, meet it with love and acceptance. And doing that is the only way to show the mind that we're safe now. We don't need this anymore. So you really have to experience that pain that the inner child experienced. You have to live it, embody it, and feel it with a loving awareness, not a resistance. And that's the only way to heal it. And that's kind of a difficult thing to do, because nobody wants to relive painful memories. But if you really want freedom, that's the only way to get it.
Yeah. And I love how you say, like, one of the ways to do that is like by asking for forgiveness from that part of yourself that you've kind of kept in the dark this whole time.
Yeah.
And it's like, because as the Course describes, like, it's like, for me, when they talk about forgiveness in the Course, that like, I kind of like think about love every time they say forgiveness. And so it's like loving that part of myself that I've been rejecting. And then I like too, how you talk about like, then like integrating it by like thanking it, for
Yeah.
helping you heal. And it's like one of my buddies actually who introduced me to you, who's been on this podcast before, my buddy Etheric, this hip hop artist, he was saying that he's like, the thing is that you've essentially, when you began this journey of enlarging your spiritual life and meditating, you've asked to heal all your trauma. And so it's like subconsciously now you've asked. And so now the universe is showing you all these situations that are triggering your trauma in order for you to heal from it. So you want to thank it in order to integrate.
Yes. It's giving you what you asked for.
Mm.
But truly at the root, and this is what I really try to teach most often, is like at the root of all suffering is the belief that I am this person. It's the act of being identified that's the problem. So you can actually uproot all of your shadows, all of your traumas, by uprooting the person altogether. And that's a very rare thing for people to do. It's not very common that people have an experience of true self-realization. But somebody like Eckhart Tolle, right? He didn't have to go do shadow work after his awakening, because the belief that that person ever existed is gone. So now there's nothing for the mind to even reference anymore. The subject of the story is gone. So you can't have a story without a subject. So until somebody is able to get to that point of true self-realization and ego death, then we say, let's do some shadow work, right? Let's go back to those stories and meet them with love. But even doing that is also uprooting the identity, because you can't be equating yourself as the person who was attacked or abused or abandoned. As long as you believe you are that person, which really is to say the body, I am the body. As long as you believe that, you will always perpetuate it. So the I am the body idea has to be eliminated somehow. And shadow work's actually a helpful way to do that, because when you step out of the role of the inner child who was abandoned or abused, and you come to it as loving awareness itself and say, come here, sweetheart, let me love you. Of course you felt that way. Of course you were hurt. You had no choice but to be. Nothing about that was wrong. Well, who are you talking to this inner child? I thought you were that inner child. Well, now you're something else. Now you have become love and are meeting that child from a subject-object relationship. So that's another way of removing identity from the person.
Yeah, and I think that as you do that slowly over time, you start to embody that experience more in your life.
Exactly.
And it was interesting, even when you were just saying that, it was it was almost like a spiritual experience, just like thinking about how it's really that simple. Like you remove the subject from the story. And, it was like I was listening to you and I was thinking like even like little things, like I'll do this sometimes on the podcast when I'm interviewing someone. I'm like, I wasn't as much in the flow state, I'll say, on this episode as I thought like I should have been. And then when you were saying that, it was like, for a second, I almost like had that experience of like being like, well, there's not even like,
that's a story.
Me.
Huh?
That's a story. Like there's not even a me. I don't even exist.
Who's not in the flow state?
Yeah. Who's not in the flow state? Exactly. In that moment, it was like, I felt this feeling of expansion and freedom, because it's like,
yes,
it's like, who's not in the, there's just one infinite creator. Yes. And it's like, I got to merge back with that for a moment and drop that subject that was the only thing ever experiencing suffering in that moment.
That's exactly it. So right there is true shadow work, is to follow that. Ramana called it the I thought. There's the first most original thought the mind creates is the thought of I who does something. The act of being identified that's what ego is. So there's this I thought that kind of weaves its way through every single movement of the mind, every thought, every action, every feeling. Something claims it as me, the person's thought, me, the person's action or feeling or whatever, or story. And so really we can deal with the stories and go back and love them and heal them. And that's an absolutely valid practice for people at that stage. But there will come a stage where you say, actually, who's the person who even lived that story? I'm not so sure that that's real either. And you start looking at that act of being identified, and just, Ramana said, just follow that I thought, watch that impulse to say, that was me, that was my story, that was my experience, and question that. Who's the I who had that story? and you'll always find there's nobody there. It's an illusion the mind creates.
Yeah. Deepak Chopra talks about like asking yourself, like, who is the one having this thought right now?
Self-inquiry.
Exactly. Self-inquiry. And it's like, I just, it's like, and again, it's like when we're experiencing this trauma though, it's like, and we become the I story, that's when the suffering, happens. And it's like, then it's like, but then when you even just, the shadow work that we've been talking about and healing our trauma, it's like when you do heal the trauma and you see that like that thing was triggered in order for you to heal this trauma in yourself, then it's like, you don't regret that thing anymore. But while you were going through it, sometimes it's like, it can feel like, it could cause a lot of suffering. It's like, even like I was saying, like going back to that thought of like, oh, I wasn't as much in the flow state as I wanted to be. But it's like, to have that thought lead me to this experience we just had made that all worth it, because it was like I got the lesson that was contained in it.
Let's just get really practical with this, right? George, have you ever suffered from any of my life experiences?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm not, or I guess I have, because I don't know.
You're not identified as Aaron.
Oh yeah.
So whatever happens to me is of no consequence to you.
Sure.
So you can actually have that experience with your own story or your own personal identity. If you can clearly see the unreality of this story of being a person and actually see it's not true, like question it, investigate it, contemplate it, look at it, that becomes a daily, I say practice, but it doesn't feel like a practice. There's a genuine curiosity driving it that you cannot get away from. You're just like endlessly curious, like, where did I get this idea that I am this person? Like, it's not my experience that I am a body. I don't know how I'm doing any of this. I don't know how I make my blood circulate, how my heart's beating. I didn't invent the way my face looks. I am not this body. I'm just experiencing a body. And the more you look at that, you're more like, yeah, this is not true. It's just a lie I've been believing. And so from that reference point, all of Aaron's stories that happened are just as inconsequential to me as George's stories. It's like, sure, I have compassion for your suffering, but I'm not identified as it. Sure. I'm not suffering because you suffer. So you uproot the whole thing in one go when you see that the subject of the story never existed.
Yeah, it's like, exactly, it brings you back to this idea that like, we're just a conduit, for God, to experience itself. And it's like, when I realize that, then like, there's no George, I'm infinite, I'm unbounded, I'm blissful. And so anything other than that, it's like, I don't know the Rumi quote, and I got to remember, but there's one that said like, it goes back to the silence thing where it's like, I forget exactly what he said, but he said, maybe the quote, it's something like, why do I speak in silence or something? Or I asked God, like, what is the language of God? And then it was like silence, and anything other than that is unworthy or something.
Yeah. What a great quote, man.